She collapsed backstage with her lashes still glued on. Rita forgot her own name by 40, and Barbara sold kisses on the street for rent money. They were once untouchable. Now, 18 actresses who proved their beauty wasn't their protection, but rather, it was the first thing Hollywood used, then threw away. Number 1. Judy Garland, the studio's diamond that was crushed. In 1939, she led us over the rainbow, but behind the curtain, Judy Garland was already being broken apart. She was just 16 when MGM cast her as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and in the studio's eyes, that innocent Kansas farm girl needed to stay thin, wide-eyed, and obedient, no matter the cost. They told her she wasn't pretty enough, her nose too round, her waist too thick, her face too ordinary for the screen. So they remade her, with corsets, painted-on dimples, and pills that kept her awake. Then knocked her out. The studio handed them out like breath mints, and Garland, still a teenager, learned to live in a state of permanent performance. On screen, she sparkled, but off camera, her body trembled under the strain. She wasn't just acting through exhaustion, she was surviving it. MGM demanded endless energy, a doll-like waistline, and a bright smile, even as her hands shook and her eyes dulled. When she began to falter, when the joy no longer looked real, the same studio that molded her beauty began to punish her for losing it. They labeled her difficult, unreliable, unstable. No one asked why. By her 20s, Judy was already battling personal demons no one could see in the posters. She had been through 2 public breakdowns, several rushed marriages, and relentless pressure to stay marketable. The face on screen still sold tickets, but it no longer belonged to her. Years of forced dieting, sleepless nights, and emotional neglect had carved deep lines into her skin. Her once luminous eyes grew tired, her voice raspy from holding in too much pain. And yet, she kept performing because it was the only thing they ever valued. In her final years, Garland was a far cry from the girl who sang in Technicolor. Tabloids mocked her for her weight swings, her money troubles, her collapse on stage. But no one looked close enough to see the real damage, not just to her beauty, but to her soul. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones until you forget what it feels like to be whole. She died at 47. A legend, yes, but also a casualty of beauty, of control, of an industry that devoured the same star it created. In the end, her beauty wasn't lost. It was taken, piece by piece, by a machine that demanded she stay perfect, even as it broke her down from the inside. Number 2. Rita Hayworth, the love goddess who forgot herself. In 1946, Rita Hayworth walked onto the screen in a satin black gown, peeled off one glove, and made movie history. They called her the Love Goddess, a title she never asked for, but one Hollywood used like a brand. With her smoldering stare, auburn waves, and hourglass figure, she became the dream pinned to locker doors and plastered across marquees. But behind the camera, Hayworth was a woman, constantly at war with her reflection, and with the industry that told her who to be, then punished her for becoming it. Born Margarita Cancino, she was forced to erase her own heritage to fit a mold. Studios raised her hairline with electrolysis, dyed her dark hair red, and gave her a new name that sounded more American. They didn't just change her, they rewrote her. The girl who danced with her father in smoky Tijuana clubs became Hollywood's ultimate seduction, but lost pieces of herself in the transformation. She soared in Gilda, but her off-screen life spiraled. 5 failed marriages, including to Orson Welles and a literal prince, left her drained. Rumors followed her like a shadow, whispered affairs, emotional breakdowns, nights she couldn't quite remember. In public, she smiled for flashbulbs. In private, she struggled with forgetfulness, confusion, and long stretches of silence. At first, they blamed it on exhaustion, then on the bottle. By the 1970s, the changes were undeniable. Her once graceful walk grew uncertain. She fumbled her lines. She asked the same question over and over. What am I supposed to say? Friends thought she was simply aging, but it wasn't just time catching up. It was Alzheimer's, diagnosed far too late. The disease had been stealing her memory, her poise, and her beauty for years. The world had admired her body, while her mind was quietly slipping away. She died in 1987, unable to recognize the woman she used to be, or the image the world never let her forget. Her daughter, Yasmin, later said, "It wasn't the drink. It wasn't scandal. It was something far crueler. A forgetting." Rita Hayworth wasn't destroyed by age. She was erased by an industry that taught her to be perfect, then turned its back when she began to fade. Number 3. Barbara Payton, the blonde bombshell who ended on Skid Row. In 1950, she lit up the screen in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. But for Barbara Payton, tomorrow never came. She had everything Hollywood adored: platinum hair, ice blue eyes, and a sultry smile that could stop traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Casting agents called her the next big thing. Photographers chased her from premieres to pool parties. But for Barbara, fame wasn't a staircase. It was a trapdoor. Her rise was electric, but it came with a catch. She wasn't just admired, she was devoured. Studios wanted her sexy, scandalous, and compliant. When she dated leading men, they encouraged it. When she became the center of a violent love triangle between actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, they turned it into publicity. Even after Tone was beaten unconscious by Neal in front of her home, Payton was paraded in front of cameras, smiling through the wreckage. But beneath the headlines, something was breaking. Her reputation, once red-hot, began to sour. Studios whispered that she was unmanageable. The offers dried up. By the mid-1950s, Payton was out of pictures and deep into a spiral of personal demons. She was reportedly struggling to stay sober, drifting between arrests, affairs, and cheap motels. Her once glamorous image faded fast. The cheekbones dulled. Her eyes, once sharp and flirtatious, looked vacant. Her face began to carry the weight of every betrayal, from the industry and from herself. In 1962, she released a memoir titled I Am Not Ashamed. It was raw, unfiltered, and heartbreaking, a confession wrapped in defiance. But rather than spark a comeback, it only confirmed what Hollywood had already decided. Barbara Payton had become a cautionary tale. She was last seen living in squalor, reportedly selling herself on Sunset, just blocks from where she once walked red carpets. By the time she died in 1967, just 39 years old, her body had been ravaged by years of poverty, illness, and despair. The coroner's report cited liver failure, malnutrition, and years of neglect. Her beauty, once her passport to fame, had become her prison. Barbara Payton was the proof that in Hollywood, they'll build you up for your looks, then throw you out for the very same reason. Number 4. Gloria Grahame, the lip that wouldn't heal. In 1952, she won an Oscar with a whisper and a pout, but it was her lips that would ultimately betray her. Gloria Grahame wasn't just another blonde. She was the smoky-voiced siren of film noir, a master of seduction through subtlety. With that half-smile, those slightly slurred lines, and the unique curve of her upper lip, she didn't need to scream to steal a scene. In The Big Heat, In a Lonely Place, and The Bad and the Beautiful, she lit the screen with danger wrapped in velvet. But off-camera, that same lip, the one critics called unforgettable, became her obsession. Unhappy with the thinness of her upper lip, Gloria began experimenting with cosmetic procedures at a time when the industry offered few safe options. She reportedly injected paraffin wax into the area herself, hoping to achieve symmetry. At first, it seemed to work, but the wax hardened over time, leaving behind a lumpy, uneven texture that makeup could only partly conceal. Directors began to shoot her from one side. Cinematographers softened the lighting, But the damage grew too difficult to hide and too difficult to ignore. As her screen time shrank, her confidence did too. Critics, once enchanted by her allure, now wrote coldly about her frozen expression and unreadable mouth. The very feature that made her famous was now costing her roles. She turned to the stage, then to television, but the camera was no longer kind. And Hollywood rarely offered second chances to women with imperfect faces. Behind the scenes, her personal life didn't help. A controversial marriage to her former stepson ignited tabloid scandal. Whispers of instability and vanity followed her. In her later years, she became increasingly reclusive, refusing interviews and avoiding mirrors. She passed away in 1981, quietly, with most obituaries using old photos, ones that preserved her before the change. The newer images, rarely seen, almost forgotten. Gloria Grahame was a star who tried to preserve the very thing Hollywood loved about her, and in doing so, lost it. The lip that once drew the spotlight became the scar that drove it away. Number 5. Ava Gardner, the world's most beautiful animal, paralyzed by fate. In 1950, MGM declared her the world's most beautiful animal, but by the end, Ava Gardner was hiding from her own reflection. She was Hollywood's untamed flame, a southern girl with emerald eyes, a voice like velvet soaked in bourbon, and a presence that made camera lenses tremble. When she walked into a room, silence followed, not because people were in awe, but because they couldn't look away. In The Killers, Mogambo, and The Barefoot Contessa, she didn't act. She devoured the screen. But Ava's beauty wasn't just admired, it was marketed. Studio executives used it like bait. Men chased it. Women envied it. And Ava, who had always felt like an outsider in the polished world of Hollywood, learned to live as the image, even when it didn't feel like hers. She drank, she danced, she loved hard. But as the years passed, the image began to crack. In 1986, at the age of 63, Ava suffered a major stroke that changed everything. The left side of her face, her smile, her eye, even the lift of her cheekbone, fell still. Her walk turned to a limp. Her speech slowed. The woman once worshipped for her fire now moved through the world as if walking through ash. She retreated to her London apartment, turning down interviews and refusing public appearances. According to her housekeeper, Ava removed nearly every mirror from her home. The only one that remained was a compact, small enough to apply makeup, but never large enough to remind her of what had changed. She never married again. Friends who visited said she still had flashes of wit, but her eyes held something heavier, the weight of someone who once held the world's gaze and no longer wanted to be seen. And yet, even in isolation, she refused self-pity. As she once said in an interview, "I've never regretted anything I've done, only the things I didn't do." She died in 1990, her once electric beauty muted by time and illness, but her legend still burning in the celluloid reels she left behind. Ava Gardner lived as a goddess, but died as a ghost, a reminder that in Hollywood, beauty is worshipped until it falters. Number 6. Hedy Lamarr, the face they valued more than her mind. In the 1940s, Hedy Lamarr was called the most beautiful woman in the world. But no one cared. She was also one of the smartest, with flawless symmetry, porcelain skin, and eyes that seemed to whisper secrets. She became the epitome of screen perfection in films like Algiers, Ziegfeld Girl, and Samson and Delilah. Men adored her. Studios sold her like a fantasy, but behind that face, the one Hollywood worshipped, was a restless mind bursting with ideas the industry had no use for. What the public didn't know was that between takes and costume fittings, Lamarr was sketching blueprints. During World War II, she co-invented a frequency-hopping system designed to prevent enemy torpedoes from jamming Allied signals. It was the foundation for technologies we use today: Wi-Fi, Jeep Bluetooth. But in the 1940s, the government dismissed her as a distraction. "Leave the thinking to the men," they told her. "Just keep selling war bonds." She was a genius trapped in a beauty ad. And, eventually, the strain showed. As she aged, Hollywood's offers slowed. Her identity, so tightly bound to her appearance, began to unravel the moment time dared touch it. Desperate to maintain the image that had been forced on her, Lamarr turned to cosmetic procedures that were, at the time, experimental at best. She underwent multiple injections, including liquid silicone, a substance that, once hardened, left her cheeks swollen and stiff. The results were devastating. The elegant lines of her face became warped. Her smile, once playful, grew rigid. Expressions dulled. Directors stopped calling. By the 1970s, Lamarr had withdrawn completely from public life. Friends said she no longer trusted her reflection or the people around her. She lived in solitude, rarely seen, and often communicating only by phone to avoid being looked at. It wasn't until years after her death in 2000 that the world began to acknowledge her inventions. Too late to hear the applause, Hedy Lamarr gave the world beauty and brilliance. One was celebrated, the other was ignored. In the end, she wasn't destroyed by time, but by a system that only saw her face and never the fire behind it. Number 7. Susan Peters, Hollywood's fragile flower crushed too soon. In 1942, she was hailed as the next great leading lady, graceful, glowing, and barely in her 20s. But just 3 years later, Susan Peters would never walk again. She didn't explode onto the scene with scandal or seduction. Instead, Peters captivated with something rarer: sincerity. Her performance in Random Harvest earned her an Academy Award nomination, and audiences fell for her quiet intensity. The way she could hold pain just behind her eyes, without ever letting it spill. MGM had big plans. She was soft-featured, elegant, and refined, the kind of beauty they could mold into longevity. But fate intervened before they could. In 1945, during a New Year's hunting trip with her husband, actor Richard Quine, a rifle accidentally discharged. The bullet struck her spine. In an instant, she was paralyzed from the waist down. Hollywood's fragile flower, once poised to blossom, had been broken by something no studio could rewrite. She tried to come back. She filmed The Sign of the Ram from a wheelchair. Her performance haunted and raw. But the camera, once enchanted, now lingered differently. The studios hesitated. Insurance companies refused to cover her. Her beauty, while still visible, was now seen through the lens of limitation. And that made her, to Hollywood's eye, a risk. The weight of being sidelined at 24 was immense. Peters battled reported depression and struggled with severe weight loss. The delicate glow that had once lit up the screen gave way to a paleness, a brittleness that no lighting could hide. Photographs from her final years show a woman gaunt and withdrawn, her expression locked somewhere between defiance and sorrow. She died in 1952, at just 31. The official cause was kidney failure and malnutrition, but those close to her knew the truth. Her spirit had worn down long before her body did. Susan Peters wasn't ruined by scandal, vanity, or excess, but by something far more merciless: silence. Hollywood loved her beauty, until it couldn't package it anymore. And like so many others, she was left behind, not for who she was, but for what she could no longer pretend to be. Number 8. Jean Tierney. Fixed her mind, broke her face. In 1944, she was the face every man dreamed about, the haunting, sculpted beauty of Laura. But behind those hypnotic eyes, Jean Tierney was slipping into darkness, with a face like porcelain and a voice dipped in melancholy. Tierney didn't need dramatics to captivate. She was the drama. Her performances in Leave Her to Heaven, The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and The Razor's Edge left audiences breathless. Directors praised her as the most photogenic woman in Hollywood, but no camera could capture the storm that was gathering behind her elegance. In 1943, while pregnant with her first child. Jean appeared at a Hollywood canteen to meet fans. What she didn't know, until it was too late, was that one admirer had broken quarantine while infected with rubella. Tierney contracted the illness. Months later, her daughter was born, blind, deaf, and with severe developmental challenges. The guilt never left her. Over time, the weight of that trauma carved into her like glass. She battled what was then referred to only in hushed tones, deep depressive episodes, mood swings, and periods of disconnection from reality. By the early 1950s, Jean voluntarily entered the Menninger Clinic for treatment. What followed was a common practice of the era, electroconvulsive therapy. It was meant to save her mind, and perhaps it did, but it also left scars. Friends and fans noticed a change after her return. Her expression seemed muted, her once emotive face oddly restrained. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed. It wasn't age. It wasn't vanity. It was the lingering effect of a treatment so violent, it sometimes robbed people of memory, movement, and even the full range of their own expressions. She tried to return and advise and consent in 1962, but the camera no longer adored her the same way. Critics spoke kindly, but the subtext was clear. Something was missing, or rather, something had been taken. In her later years, Jean admitted it herself with heartbreaking clarity. "They fixed my mind, but broke something in my face." For Jean Tierney, beauty wasn't stolen by scandal. It was quietly taken by the very hands that claimed to help. Hollywood applauded her strength, but never forgave her silence. Number 9. Frances Farmer. The rebel the studio broke in body and face. In 1937, she walked onto the Paramount lot with cheekbones that could cut glass and a gaze that refused to blink. Frances Farmer didn't want to play the game, and Hollywood made sure she lost it. She wasn't just beautiful. She was brilliant, poised, articulate, with a haunting kind of intensity that made her stand out from the chorus of starlets vying for the spotlight. In films like Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range, she delivered performances with rawness and restraint. Critics loved her, but producers didn't. She refused to flirt at parties. She rejected roles that felt beneath her. She questioned contracts, and worse, she did it in public. The studio system, still at its peak, didn't tolerate rebellion. So they turned her into a problem. Rumors circulated. Erratic behavior, lateness, arrogance. Soon, she was being followed by headlines instead of film crews. Then came the arrests. One public outburst, then another, and suddenly, Frances wasn't a rising star anymore. She was a cautionary tale. In 1943, she was declared mentally unwell and institutionalized. That's when the real damage began. Over the next several years, she endured what's now regarded as some of the most brutal psychiatric treatment of the era: insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive sessions, isolation. Whatever spark had once lit her eyes was slowly extinguished under flickering hospital lights. Her posture, once proud, became stiff and mechanical. Her voice, once steady, grew flat and uncertain. Friends who visited said her skin looked grayed, her face prematurely aged, her beauty hollowed out from the inside. She was released in the 1950s, barely recognizable. Hollywood welcomed her back, politely, but not with offers. She made a few small appearances, gave a few tired interviews. But the camera that once adored her seemed confused now, unsure how to frame a face that had once been perfection, now shaded in pain. Frances died in 1970. No scandal, no send-off, just quiet obscurity. They broke her because she wouldn't bow. And when her face no longer matched their fantasy, they erased her. A rebel whose beauty wasn't lost to time, but to punishment. She dared to say no, and they answered by taking everything. Number 10. Veronica Lake. Peekaboo fame to poverty and bloat. In 1942, her hair started a war. Or so the headlines said, but no one warned her it would also help end her career. Veronica Lake didn't need dialogue to be remembered. With that iconic peekaboo bang and a sultry glance through platinum strands, she became a sensation overnight. In Sullivan's Travels, This Gun for Hire, and The Blue Dahlia, she was the femme fatale with an ice-cold stare and a voice like smoke curling in a jazz bar. Soldiers painted her face on aircraft. Women copied her hairstyle until the government begged them not to. It was causing factory accidents, but behind the curtain of silver hair, Veronica was unraveling. Off-screen, she struggled with personal demons that the studio tried to hide. Reports from sets described erratic moods and feuds with co-stars. Her marriage was in turmoil, and as the roles slowed, the pressure to stay relevant and beautiful intensified. She began turning to the bottle, and as the years wore on, the effects started to show. The slim silhouette that once draped gowns became bloated. Her flawless complexion dulled. Her signature wave lost its luster. By 1952, Paramount had enough. They dropped her. Just like that, the woman who had once stopped traffic was cast aside. And Hollywood, always hungry for the next fresh face, never looked back. In 1962, a reporter found her working as a cocktail waitress in Manhattan. She was 39. Still blonde, but puffier now. Her posture had wilted. Her eyes looked older than they should have. When asked how she felt about being recognized, she replied simply, "What you see now is the real person." She made a few attempts at a comeback, even publishing an autobiography, but it wasn't enough. Her final years were spent in obscurity and financial hardship, drifting between small jobs and low-rent rooms. She died in 1973 from kidney failure linked to years of poor health. She had just $400 to her name. Veronica Lake was the face of an era, and when that era ended, so did their interest in her. Her beauty made her a star, but in the end, it was the only thing they ever saw. And when it faded, so did their memory of who she really was. Number 11, Gail Russell. The face the bottle ruined. In 1944, Gail Russell looked like she'd stepped out of a dream. Delicate features, soulful blue eyes, and a kind of innocence that didn't seem performative, because it wasn't. But that same innocence would soon be devoured by a town that never gave her a chance to grow up. She didn't want to be an actress. She said so plainly. Paramount discovered her in high school, drawn to her ethereal beauty and haunting presence. But once she signed that contract, there was no turning back. Thrust into the spotlight with no training and paralyzing stage fright, Gail struggled with deep anxiety from the very beginning. Her hands shook on set. Her voice trembled through lines. And in the pressure cooker of the studio system, nerves weren't tolerated. They were medicated. She was introduced to the bottle not as rebellion, but as survival. Just enough to steady her hands. Just enough to get through a scene. But soon, the just enough wasn't enough. As her roles grew, The Uninvited, Angel and the Bad Man, Moonrise, so did the cracks beneath the surface. Her once luminous skin began to dull. Her weight fluctuated. Her eyes, once hauntingly clear, started to carry a fog. The public still saw a beauty, but those who looked closely began to notice the slippage, the faint puffiness, the stiff, uneven smile, the signs of someone who couldn't stay sober and didn't know how to ask for help. By the late 1950s, Gail was appearing more in courtrooms than on screen. A widely circulated mugshot showed the toll. Her face bloated, her gaze distant, the glamour replaced with visible pain. She tried for a comeback, even returned to the screen briefly, but the damage was too great. Hollywood didn't want to manage her struggle, only her image. In 1961, she was found alone in her small apartment. The cause? Liver damage. She was just 36. Gail Russell wasn't destroyed by scandal or vanity. She was destroyed by fear and a system that handed her a contract, then left her to drown in silence. Her beauty made her valuable, but her fragility made her disposable. And once her glow dimmed, they looked away, just as she always feared they would. Number 12. Linda Darnell. The perfect face burned in a fire. In the 1940s, studio executives called her the girl with the perfect face. But by the time of her death, That face was gone, taken in the most horrific way imaginable. Linda Darnell rose fast. With raven hair, dark almond eyes, and flawless symmetry, she seemed born for Technicolor. In films like Forever Amber, A Letter to Three Wives, and My Darling Clementine, she wasn't just admired, she was worshipped. Her beauty was natural, untouched by studio gimmicks. Daryl F. Zanuck reportedly banned makeup artists from altering a thing, and for a time, that worked in her favor. But Hollywood's golden rules applied to her too. Youth fades, and so does favor. As she entered her 30s, the roles slowed, the spotlight dimmed. Darnell, once a prized icon, began slipping quietly down the call sheet. She took smaller parts in television and stage productions, fighting to keep her image intact, even as her finances crumbled and her personal life unraveled. Then, in 1965, tragedy struck. While visiting her former secretary in Illinois, Linda was trapped in a late-night house fire. Accounts say she had just watched one of her old films on TV, a haunting echo of who she once was. When the fire broke out, she tried to save the woman's young daughter, rushing through thick smoke and flames. But she was caught in the blaze. Over 80% of her body was burned. She was rushed to the hospital, barely clinging to life. She died the next day. She was just 41. The irony was unbearable. The woman whose beauty had once defined a generation, whose face had sold movie tickets and adorned magazine covers, spent her final moments disfigured beyond recognition. Even in death, Hollywood couldn't let go of her image. News outlets ran her glamour shots alongside headlines of her destruction. Linda Darnell's beauty didn't fade from age or scandal. It was stolen in a flash of fire. She died a hero, but she was remembered as a tragedy. And for a town obsessed with appearances, that was the final cruelty. Not that she was gone, but that her face could no longer be sold. Number 13. Dorothy Dandridge. Beauty Beyond Barriers. Broken by Pressure. In 1954, she made history. The first black woman nominated for Best Actress. But beneath the satin gowns and spotlight smiles, Dorothy Dandridge was carrying a weight Hollywood refused to see. She wasn't just beautiful, she was mesmerizing. Her performance in Carmen Jones was magnetic, bold, sensual, vulnerable. Audiences couldn't look away. But for the studio system, Dorothy was a problem they didn't know how to package. Too glamorous for the roles they offered black women. Maids, mammies, comic relief. And too black for the roles they gave white actresses. She existed in a limbo of desire and denial. Behind the scenes, the rejection was constant. She was offered scraps compared to her white counterparts. Scripts demanded she be exotic but not powerful, sultry but never central. When she pushed back, she was labeled difficult. When she stayed silent, the system mistook it for gratitude. Her personal life fared no better. Her daughter, born with severe developmental issues, required full-time care, emotionally and financially draining. Dorothy worked tirelessly to cover mounting medical bills, legal fees, and debts from failed business ventures. But Hollywood had already turned its back. As her roles vanished, she leaned into nightclub performances and public appearances, chasing a former glow that seemed to retreat each time she reached for it. She tried to preserve her image, kept her hair perfect, her figure trim, her smile camera-ready. But even mirrors began to betray her. In her final years, she looked older than she was. The sparkle in her eyes flickered under the weight of exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones when you're fighting a war you know you can't win. In 1965, she was found alone in her apartment. The cause was ruled a fatal mix of pills, though speculation followed her even in death. Some say it was accidental. Others whisper it was the pressure finally breaking through. Dorothy Dandridge didn't just fight for fame. She fought for space, for room to exist. Her beauty was never the problem. It was the world that couldn't accept where it came from. And in the end, she wasn't undone by scandal, but by the slow, silent suffocation of being exceptional in a system that preferred her invisible. Number 14. Patricia Neal, the actress who relearned how to smile. In 1963, Patricia Neal won an Oscar for HUD, delivering a performance so raw, so grounded, it silenced the room. 2 years later, she couldn't speak at all. Patricia wasn't just talented, she was magnetic. With that husky voice and intelligent gaze, she brought a quiet power to the screen. She held her own opposite, Paul Newman, Ronald Reagan, and Gary Cooper, the last of whom she famously had a long affair with. While he remained married, the studios whispered. The press judged. But Patricia kept acting, kept surviving. Then came the silence. In 1965, at just 39 years old and a mother of 5, she suffered a series of massive strokes while pregnant. Doctors didn't think she'd make it. She lost her ability to speak, to walk, even to recognize her own children. The woman who once lit up movie screens was now learning how to hold a spoon. But what followed wasn't a scandal. It was a war, a slow, grueling battle to reclaim herself. Her husband at the time, author Roald Dahl, refused to give up on her. He built a brutal, structured recovery program, one that would later inspire methods used in stroke rehabilitation worldwide. Day after day, Patricia endured endless drills, counting, repeating, walking, failing, crying, trying again. It took years, but she fought her way back. She returned to acting, even earning another Oscar nomination for The Subject Was Roses. Her voice had changed. Her face had softened. But her eyes still burned with something stronger than beauty, resilience. Yet the industry that once applauded her didn't know what to do with a woman who had come back wrong. The roles were fewer, the headlines had faded, and though she smiled, there was a shadow behind it, the kind that only appears when someone has seen the edge and crawled back. Patricia Neal didn't just survive, she rebuilt. But in Hollywood, surviving wasn't always the story they wanted. Her triumph was quiet, private. And perhaps that was the final twist. The actress, who once commanded every frame, had to fight for the most basic lines and learned somehow to deliver them with more truth than ever before. Number 15. Marie Prevost, flapper fame to forgotten frame. In the Roaring '20s, Marie Prevost was everything Hollywood wanted and everything it would later discard. She burst onto the scene like a champagne cork, wild-eyed and radiant, with a signature pout that became the envy of every flapper girl in America. At her peak, she starred in over 100 films, danced alongside the biggest names in silent cinema, and had a studio contract that promised the world. She was witty, glamorous, and full of life, the perfect face for an era built on illusion. But Marie's life moved faster than the industry could handle. When the talkies arrived, her voice didn't quite match the image audiences had projected onto her. And worse, her figure began to change. In a town obsessed with youth and thinness, Marie's curves, once celebrated, became a liability. Executives whispered. Roles vanished. Tabloids snickered. She fought back, but not with scripts or speeches, with crash diets and pills, the kind of weight loss that takes more than fat. It eats away at confidence, dignity, even sanity. She grew isolated, both professionally and personally. The men who once lined up to court her had moved on. Friends stopped calling. The camera didn't forget her. It simply stopped showing up. By the early 1930s, Marie was living in a small Los Angeles apartment, taking bit parts when she could, pawning off jewelry to make rent. There were no premieres, no applause, just her and her dog, alone with memories of stardom that now felt like dreams someone else had. Her death came quietly in 1937. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't glamorous. It was just sad. The coroner cited malnutrition. Neighbors claimed she had stopped eating, the kind of hunger that doesn't come from food, but from being unseen. Marie Prevost didn't burn out. She faded, frame by forgotten frame. Her story is a cautionary tale about what happens when an industry built on image decides it no longer likes what it sees. She was never less beautiful, only less valuable to those who sold beauty for profit. In the end, it wasn't her talent that failed her. It was the system that taught her she only mattered if she looked a certain way. Number 16. Lupe Vélez, The Final Scene. She staged, then lost. She lit up the screen with fire in her eyes and a laugh that could stop traffic. But Lupe Vélez was never allowed to just be. She had to be more. Born in Mexico and hailed as the Mexican Spitfire, Vélez wasn't just beautiful. She was electric. Audiences adored her wild charm, her razor wit, her refusal to play quiet. But behind the scenes, Hollywood only saw her as a stereotype, dramatic, volatile, unpredictable. They sold her image as exotic and untamable, and Lupe tried to live up to it until it started to swallow her whole. In private, she longed for stability, but the roles were drying up. Talkies had come, and with them, a new wave of actresses, quieter, softer, blonder. Lupe, with her sharp tongue and accented English, was left auditioning not for scripts, but for relevance. Then came the affair. A young, handsome actor, Harold Maresh. He was charming, ambitious, and not interested in marriage. When Lupe learned she was pregnant, she allegedly begged him to do right by her. He refused. In the eyes of 1940s America, an unwed pregnancy was career-ending, reputation-ending, life-ending. So Lupe decided to write her final scene. She set her bedroom like a stage. Silk sheets, flowers, candles, the kind of setting a star would want to be remembered in. A fatal mix of pills was meant to let her drift off, elegant and composed. A final performance, flawless in its heartbreak. But real life isn't a movie. The pills didn't go as planned. Rumors swirled, whispers of a panicked stumble to the bathroom, a far less graceful end than the one she'd envisioned. The press turned her tragedy into gossip. The image she tried so hard to control was reduced to tabloid fodder. Again, Lupe Vélez spent her life trying to be bigger than the box they put her in. But in the end, it was that very box, the image of the willed Latina, the demand for perfection, the fear of scandal, that crushed her. She wasn't too emotional. She was too human for a system that wanted cardboard cutouts. Her beauty gave her a spotlight, but never safety. And when she tried to choreograph her exit, Hollywood still found a way to steal the stage. Number 17. Gloria Swanson, the starlet who couldn't let go. In 1925, she was the queen of the silver screen, cloaked in silk, dripping in diamonds, and commanding $10,000 a week. But behind the glitter, Gloria Swanson was clinging to a dream Hollywood no longer wanted. She rose during the silent era, a goddess of glamour who made even stillness feel loud. Men adored her. Women copied her every move. She wasn't just famous. She was mythic. But with the arrival of sound, the world she ruled began to shift. Her voice was fine, her presence still magnetic. But tastes were changing, and Gloria couldn't change with them. She tried everything: talkies, Broadway, even foreign films. But each comeback fell just short of revival. And each time, she doubled down. She poured her fortune into vanity projects, most notoriously Queen Kelly, a film so extravagant it never even reached theaters. She financed it herself, battling with directors, ignoring warnings. She wanted perfection. What she got was bankruptcy. Off-screen, things fared no better. Swanson married 6 times, fell into scandal with Joseph Kennedy, yes, that Kennedy, and struggled to keep up the image she'd built. She wrapped herself in fur and feathers while quietly selling off jewels to stay afloat. She wasn't chasing fame anymore. She was fighting extinction. Then, in 1950, Hollywood handed her a mirror in the form of Sunset Boulevard. As Norma Desmond, she played a faded silent film queen who couldn't accept that her stardom was over. It was eerie, raw, too close to real. Critics called it her comeback, but Gloria didn't see it that way. To her, it was a role, not a reflection. But audiences saw the ghost beneath the makeup. Gloria Swanson's tragedy wasn't that she lost fame, It's that she couldn't live without it. She spent decades trying to outshine her past, only to be remembered for a role that mourned it. Her beauty gave her power, but also imprisoned her, a woman frozen in time, while the world kept moving. She wasn't Norma Desmond, but like Norma, she waited too long for the cameras to roll again, not realizing the lights had already dimmed. Number 18. Dolores Hart, the star who chose to erase her glamour. In 1963, at the height of her fame, Dolores Hart kissed Elvis Presley on screen, then walked away from Hollywood forever. She had everything the studios wanted: a glowing face, a graceful figure, and a gentle voice that carried more power than volume. By the age of 24, Dolores had starred in box office hits, shared scenes with some of the era's biggest heartthrobs, and was engaged to a successful businessman. Her path was paved in gold, but beneath the spotlight, something deeper stirred, something even she couldn't ignore. There were whispers that she felt restless on set, that despite the designer gowns, the studio dinners, and the scripts with her name in bold, she felt disconnected. The roles she was offered were often shallow, her talent used to decorate rather than express, and the more the camera loved her, the more she felt like it wasn't seeing her at all. So, at the peak of her youth and beauty, Dolores did something that stunned the industry. She turned down a new film contract, broke off her engagement, and entered a Benedictine abbey in Connecticut. To the press, it was unthinkable. A starlet becoming a nun? The headlines called it a breakdown, a mystery, even a betrayal of fame. But Dolores didn't care. Behind convent walls, she traded red carpets for silence, gowns for a habit, applause for prayer. There was no scandal, no public unraveling, just a quiet vanishing, the kind that leaves more questions than answers. Years later, she reflected on her decision not with regret, but with clarity. "I left the world of make-believe for the world of truth," she once said. But still, the world never quite let go of her. Dolores Hart's story is not a fall, but a refusal. She didn't spiral, fade, or self-destruct. She chose obscurity over attention, depth over desire, peace over performance. And in doing so, she revealed something rare in Hollywood: the courage to walk away before the camera could steal her soul. Her beauty could have been her prison. Instead, it became the door she closed and locked behind her. They gave the world their glow until the mirror turned, and all Hollywood saw was age, imperfection, or silence. But behind every faded close-up was a woman, not a goddess, fighting to be seen past the spotlight. If these stories moved you, help keep them alive. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Because beauty fades, but memory, when honored, can last forever.